say that the picture you did about Jane Froman, I think was one of the best that you've ever done.
Thank you, ma'am. I enjoyed making it.
Did you ever get to meet Jane Froman?
Oh, yes. Yes?
I just asked Miss Hayward if you'd ever gotten to meet Jane Froman. She said yes.
Jane was on the set throughout the shooting of that picture. And, she really held my hand. You know, Jane's voice was in that picture, and I just dubbed to the soundtrack. Every once in a while, the boys would cut the soundtrack, and I'd hear myself. And I'd say, quick, soundtrack, back on. I couldn't stand myself singing.
Susan Hayward entered the 50s on a very high note when she received an Oscar nomination for her work in My Foolish Heart at the 1950 Academy Awards. She lost the award to Olivia de Havilland in The Heiress, but just like she had done 2 years earlier, she looked ahead positively, again saying, "I intend to win one of these things someday." Her popularity with movie audiences would also steadily increase as she starred in westerns, dramas, adventures and historical epics, opposite some of Hollywood's biggest male stars. In 1951, she was one of the most visible actresses on the screen as she appeared in I'd Climb the Highest Mountain, I Can Get It For You Wholesale and Rawhide, which were all released within a couple of months. Despite the success of many of her pictures, she was not too happy with many of them. After she had completed the biblical epos David and Bathsheba, she told producer Darryl Zanuck, "I'm not counting on an Oscar nomination this year." But he assured her that she would feel differently after her next movie, and handed her a script titled The Jane Froman Story, which would later be renamed to With a Song in My Heart. I have to be completely honest that prior to watching With a Song in My Heart, I had never heard of Jane Froman. I don't know if her fame is reduced to America, but even as someone who follows a lot of American artists past and present, I still was completely unfamiliar with her. So I assume that even in America, she is not too well known today anymore. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But it would make sense as her reputation back in those days mostly rested on her radio appearances, entertaining the troops after the end of World War II, and of course her tragic personal life, which all can make you famous for a certain amount of time, but does not necessarily guarantee never-ending popularity. After all. However, during her prime, Jane Froman had an undeniable reputation as one of the great singing stars of the US. Helen Hayes called her the darling of our country. She made the cover of Life magazine, she was among the favorite performers of President Roosevelt, and when asked about the 10 best female singers, producer Billy Rose simply answered, Jane Froman and 9 others.
Bewitched, fathered and bewildered.
Even as a 3-year-old child, Jane Froman already had a musical ear and learned melodies very quickly. And by 23, she was performing at WLW Radio, which was also the starting point for the career of Doris Day. Jane Froman was maybe a classically trained singer, but during the time with WLW, she would perform show tunes, jazz, ballads, opera and torch songs, significantly increasing her repertoire, and eventually she memorized over 2,000 songs, which would later allow her to entertain soldiers with almost every tune they wanted.
Forget your troubles and just get happy. You want to shoo all your blues away.
During the 30s, her remarkable voice also attracted the attention of Hollywood, and she would appear in 3 movies. However, an acting career was out of the question, because Jane Froman suffered from a lifelong stutter, except when she sang. As she herself later said, "Singing has always been my way of life."
Are you mine, only mine? Can I be sure that it really is true?
Jane's level of fame would increase significantly during World War II. Even before the US entered the war, she sang in military camps across the country and got nationwide attention with concerts specifically for black audiences in segregated states. But Jane's life would forever be changed when she was invited on a tour to Europe and North Africa, and her plane crashed during the landing in Lisbon, almost ripping off her leg and also dangerously injuring one of her arms. 20 doctors tell me I'll never walk again. I know raw fear, terror and despair. I try desperately to keep my leg. I struggle to find reason for it all. Why was I alone spared of all people in that section of the plane? For years, Jane Froman would suffer from the pain in her leg, and she had to undergo various difficult operations, always afraid that the leg might have been taken off when she woke up. But her voice was still intact, and due to the pressure of her medical bills, Jane Froman continued to perform and, after the end of World War II, went to Europe to entertain the troops who were waiting to either go home or be transferred to Japan, where the war was still going on. She was convinced that, due to her own injuries, she could bring hope to many of the soldiers who had been wounded too. And indeed, her tour was an enormous success. Doing 95 shows and singing for over 30,000 soldiers, Jane, together with Bob Hope, was named an honorary GI, and the American media called her a symbol of courage and an American hero. Jane herself called her tour through Europe the time of my life.
Did you once have a misfortune and have behaved so brilliantly since then you have won the admiration of the entire country?
Yes.
Are you the lovely Jane Froman?
Yes, that's right.
It's not surprising that Hollywood would soon again be interested in Jane Froman. This time not as a performer, but in her story. After all, a life full of music, romance, tragedy, inspiration and patriotism sounds like a surefire way to a big commercial success, and all major studios began to reach out to Jane Froman at the beginning of the 50s, with 20th Century Fox being the winner of the bidding war. And the star for this prestige part was also found very quickly. It was Jane Froman herself who had suggested Susan Hayward for the movie, saying, "Her heart and spirit were right. She looks like a singer. Every singer knows that when you breathe, it shows. Susan breathes. She understands how to stand, to move, and that gestures must mean something. She didn't copy me slavishly either. She had tricks of her own up her sleeve."
Come you sinners and just follow me.
Critics in 1952 agreed with Jane Froman. With a Song in My Heart was called Susan's finest performance yet, and she was considered an ideal, sensational choice for the part. Critics especially complimented her respect for Jane Froman, her dedication to learn her mannerisms and characteristics, and that the illusion was practically perfect. Jane Froman would remember how Susan Hayward spent hours watching her sing, to memorize her gestures and facial expressions, and would go with her over the entire script scene for scene, asking her about her memories of each chapter of her life. Critics did however not praise Susan's singing, because it was agreed early on during the making of With a Song in My Heart that Jane Froman would sing all the songs herself. And unlike in other cases of stars being dubbed, this fact was not hidden from the public, but rather widely published. And it did not cause any scandal because everyone agreed that Jane Froman's voice was too unique for anyone to copy it, and after all, audiences wanted to hear the real Jane Froman and not somebody trying to imitate her. And so, instead of being criticized, Susan Hayward was applauded for her lip-syncing abilities. Using Jane's real voice, however, did for some reviewers overshadow Susan's work, as they stated that it was more Jane's movie and that her voice was the highlight of With a Song in My Heart.
There are dreams I must gather, dreams we fashion the night.
The movie was also praised as a highly entertaining and provoking musical and became a big moneymaker. And it would go on to win both the Golden Globe for Best Musical and the Oscar for Best Scoring of a Musical Picture over a little production called Singing in the Rain.
On the gay white way.
Susan Hayward herself also took home a Golden Globe for her work, and the same year, the Hollywood Foreign Press also named her the world's favorite actress, and she would also leave her footprints at Grauman's Chinese Theatre.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to receive such an honor, and I accept it with great humility, knowing full well that a performer is only the result of many people working very hard together. Thank you again.
In addition, Susan was named the 9th biggest box office star of the year in the motion picture Harold Paul, Box Office Magazine named her the most popular star of the year, and Photoplay magazine also picked her for Best Actress of the Year. 1952 had certainly been good for Susan Hayward.
Right.
In the words of the, shall we say, more conservative critics, a zooming wow, a hot canary, the tops.
Before discussing Susan Hayward's performance, I have to make a confession. I'm not sure how unpopular this opinion is, but I am not the biggest fan of Jane Froman's singing. Don't get me wrong, I appreciate her talent, but the problem for me here is that her voice is perfect for something like a concert or, obviously, a radio performance. But it lacks the kind of personality that can make it more engaging in the context of a movie musical. Her voice tells the song, but it doesn't tell a story. Again, this makes sense. With a Song in My Heart is not a traditional movie musical where a character suddenly bursts into a song to move the plot along, but instead all of Jane's songs are done in the context of a performance. But this concept simply becomes repetitious very soon. Long stretches of the movie are simply one lip-syncing performance after another, with a little bit of plot in between. Considering the popularity of the movie, it's clear that this was successful. Audiences wanted to experience Jane Froman, and they certainly couldn't ask for more.
Hallelujah! Hallelujah!
However, the problem is, if you don't care too much for Jane Froman's voice in a movie context, like I do, then all the scenes of Susan Hayward standing in front of a microphone are just not very fulfilling. I know that even Jane Froman herself praised Susan Hayward for her lip-syncing, but personally, I don't think it comes across as too believable. The difference between the talking and the singing Susan Hayward is just too extreme and the effect too obvious.
For you, anything.
Back home again in Indiana.
This is in general not a problem for me. I am after all one of the few people who love Audrey Hepburn in My Fair Lady, but the lack of character development or storytelling during the song sequences drain every bit of energy from both the movie as well as Susan Hayward's performance. Moreover, whenever she is actually given a bit more to do than standing in front of a microphone, her moves feel too over-rehearsed and calculated. In short, I don't think that musicals are Susan Hayward's genre.
Shout hallelujah, come on, get happy. We're going to the promised land.
It's therefore not surprising that Susan shines brighter in the storyline parts of the movie. But even here there are differences. Most of the problems in the story are due to the script, but Susan Hayward also does not really add anything to many of her scenes. Considering the possibilities of Jane Froman's life, love, divorce, a tragic accident, the movie is unfortunately very pale and one-dimensional. The involvement of Jane Froman guaranteed that the movie retold her life story mostly faithfully. From her first job singing this jingle,
Oh, nibble a bite,
Jim's toasty peanuts.
nickel a bag,
Jim's toasty peanuts.
to her first failed marriage, her switching seats in the plane with singer Tamara Drayson, who would die in the crash, her first jobs after the accident and the use of a moving platform for her performances, and her second marriage to John Byrne, who was the co-pilot on the fatal flight and in the water with her after the crash. Jane Froman commented that when she and her husband saw the movie the first time, the two of us sat there crying like babies.
I admit there's a bond between us. That's only natural after all we've been through. And then being here together every day since the accident, of
It's
course.
more than that. You know it.
The main problem why this exciting life story never turned into an exciting movie is because it treats the character of Jane Froman too saint-like and without any human flaws. You might think this happened because Jane was still alive during the making of the movie and didn't want to be portrayed in any negative light, but Jane Froman's main reason for agreeing on a movie about her life was that, during her recovery after her accident, she became addicted to painkillers, an addiction she would be able to overcome, and she wanted the movie to give hope to people in equal situations. Unsurprisingly, this aspect of the story, as well as Jane Froman's real-life stutter, were eventually cut. For 20th Century Fox, With a Song in My Heart should only give an image of untouched perfection.
What'd you do? You hurt?
No, I'm all right.
What happened?
I just dropped my handkerchief from out your leg. You know better than to lean over like that.
I wouldn't have caused this much excitement if I'd ridden in on a horse like Lady Godiva.
In the end, this sanitized approach would also affect the work of Susan Hayward, who, despite all the showiness of the role, often feels trapped in a one-dimensional and ultimately too conventional surrounding, and her performance only emphasizes this aspect. Playing Jane without any flaws or depths, simply focusing on a limited characterization that gives Jane never-ending spirit and dignity in every scene. Which is a shame because we know that Susan Hayward was not afraid to play characters experiencing a vast amount of personal trouble. But maybe after 2 failed Oscar attempts this way, she decided to go the complete opposite route this time.
For the past 3 months, we've had the wonderful privilege of doing over 100 different shows for you men. But there'll never be another night like this.
All of this simply shows that, despite what might seem like an extremely showy part and acting opportunity, With a Song in My Heart actually did not truly offer a lot to Susan Hayward, beyond many small scenes that never feel truly connected. Neither the first nor the second love story made any impression or became in any way relevant in Susan Hayward's performance, and she has no screen chemistry with any of her male co-stars. She instead mostly shines in the scenes after the accident and Jane's recovery. Here she still plays many scenes with too much softness and ongoing positivity, but she is also able to suggest a more desperate layer beneath these feelings, a hidden inner self of pain and regret, and she also works beautifully with Selma Ritter as her determined nurse.
Why do I have to eat? I'm sick of it. I'm sick of all of it. Why don't they just go ahead and cut it off and be done with it? They know I'll never walk again. Why don't they admit it?
Who says you'll never walk again?
I do. And I'm fed up with hearing you and everybody else say that I will.
However, her greatest moments in the movie are actually her later musical moments. Not because she is suddenly extremely convincing in her lip-syncing, but because those numbers finally give her the opportunity to combine Jane's performance with the plot of the story. When Jane engages with members of the audience, or is simply enjoying the effect that her singing has on the men of the military, Susan Hayward finally becomes relaxed and spontaneous in her work, benefiting from her surroundings and bringing an energy to her scenes that she has missed so far, and that carries those moments beautifully.
How would you like me to sing something now just for you? You name it. If I know it, I'll sing it.
I'll Walk Alone.
I love that song. It's one of my favorites.
Stars at night, a big in flight.
Oh, tell me, do you sing too?
Not me.
Can't you even hum a little?
Afraid not.
All right. But if you change your mind, you just join right in, okay?
So the biopic element, the glorification of a real-life character, and the showiness of the story might suggest a much richer and complex performance. But this is unfortunately not the case, and Susan Hayward is often rather flat and uninspiring, and most of the musical scenes don't work in the context of the story or in the combination of Susan Hayward and Jane Froman. But Susan still found some touching and captivating moments in the second half of the movie, and is overall still able to carry it, maybe not going really deep, but providing some short-term entertainment. At the end of the day, critics in 52 were right when they said that With a Song in My Heart is mostly a showcase for Jane Froman, and not Susan Hayward. In 1953, Susan did not attend the Oscar ceremony, knowing that she would not be able to win against Shirley Booth, and telling Daryl Zanuck, "Look, I attended twice, and I lost twice. And I had to explain to some of those vultures who had been dying for me to lose, how there'll always be a next year. Well, I'm not going to make a television spectacle out of myself," referring to the fact that, for the first time, the Oscar ceremony would be broadcasted on television.
But isn't it exciting to know that a lot of these glamorous stars are going to be in your homes tonight? All over America, housewives are turning to their husbands and saying, "Put on your shirt, Joan Crawford is coming."
Susan was right about not winning again, but obviously the movie was still a relevant chapter in her career. The financial success and her Oscar nomination confirmed her standing in Hollywood and only increased her determination to receive the award someday herself. After her accident, Jane Froman wrote, "That little word, hope, has become the most important word in the English language for me." Well, Susan Hayward probably saw it the same way. And soon enough, her hope would finally be rewarded.